While Call of Duty still has a very strong fan base and is definitely a staple in the first-person shooter genre, there's no denying that the publishers and developers behind the franchise have definitely made some mistakes in the past. So today we're taking a look at some of the biggest mistakes and mess-ups in the Call of Duty franchise that definitely backfired. Let's get into it. First up, we have to definitely look at the monetization of Call of Duty Modern Warfare Remastered. Yeah, this was a really big debacle when all of this happened. This initially all started when Activision announced that they would be releasing the Variety Map Pack into Call of Duty 4 Remastered, and typically an announcement like this would be well received. They were really popular maps back in the day, for better or worse with the map design, and it would have felt really cool to have the complete collection of all of the maps from COD 4 available in the remastered version. But Activision, being greedy, decided that it sounded like a good idea to charge players $15 for the DLC pack. Now, normally $15 for a map pack sounds okay, but considering the maps were 10 years old at that point, and considering those maps originally released on the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 versions of Call of Duty 4 for only $10, it just didn't feel like a cool move on Activision's part. These maps should have been included from the beginning for free, and it was just obvious they were pandering for money. And Activision didn't stop there with Modern Warfare Remastered. They also introduced loot boxes into the game, which was something that was completely unnecessary, that changed the way that the game played. It was a real shame how they handled the whole situation. The next controversy on this list came just a few months before the whole Modern Warfare Remastered debacle, and it was the announcement of Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, which verified once again that Call of Duty would be using the advanced movement system that was in Black Ops 3, which was a refined version of the advanced movement system introduced in Advanced Warfare. This was a huge disappointment to fans across the board, mostly because fans had been asking for boots on the ground to return for quite some time now, and they definitely expected after Black Ops 3 that the next game would be more of a return to form. People really wanted Call of Duty to kind of go back to either a historical era or a more modern era, and with Infinite Warfare, we just got even further into the future with more advanced movements. And I think a lot of players just felt like there wasn't enough differences between Black Ops 3 and Infinite Warfare, just the way that the gameplay was designed, especially in the multiplayer, to warrant them shelling out another $60. It was a shame because the game probably could have done a lot better had they just kept it in the future and had regular Call of Duty movement, but because they decided to ignore the fan base, unfortunately, Infinite Warfare just didn't sell nearly as well as they hoped and completely changed the way that the Call of Duty franchise has been in the past couple of years. It's like they're still trying to recover from that hard hit in 2016. This definitely brings us into some of the more recent controversies, with Call of Duty Black Ops 4 cutting the campaign completely out of the game in favor of having a battle royale mode. Now, the developers have said that they never had intentions of making a campaign and they were always looking for something different, but at the same time, it definitely feels like they had to allocate their resources in a different way to try to ride on the hype train that was battle royale in 2018. This just felt like a really weird decision because Call of Duty is a very popular franchise and Activision is known for pouring tons of money into the game's developments. It just felt like a really odd decision to cut out the campaign, which is something that has been a staple of Call of Duty since the beginning of the franchise. They knew that it would be a topic of controversy amongst fans, and let's be honest, it's not like Call of Duty couldn't have allocated the resources to make a campaign happen. They still spent a large portion of their budget developing cutscenes for each specialist in the weird knockoff single player that they tried to use the multiplayer maps for, and it really just came down to the fact that it looks like Activision probably didn't want to allocate a little bit more resources to Treyarch to hire some developers to make a single player campaign, and I think a lot of people who played Call of Duty for the campaigns or like to get the achievements were disappointed by the lack of having that single player mode. This next one goes a little bit further back in time, looking specifically at Call of Duty Ghosts, but it was Infinity Ward's decision to leave the single-player campaign on a cliffhanger. At the time, Infinity Ward was known for making the greatest Call of Duty games, having made the Modern Warfare trilogy and even the original Call of Duty back in the day, and it looked like, at the time, Call of Duty Ghosts would be the beginning of something new. Little did they know, though, when they mixed up how the multiplayer played and changed the way that maps played out in the multiplayer, Call of Duty Ghosts would get slammed really hard hard by review critics and fans alike. This unfortunately ended with Call of Duty Ghosts having a really bad reputation in the Call of Duty community, and at the time, Ghosts was hated beyond any other Call of Duty game that had released thus far. And while the campaign was definitely a little bit cheesy at times, it had a pretty satisfying ending that left off on a major cliffhanger, setting the stage to tell a really larger and interesting story that was really going to take the characters that had been introduced in different directions. Except it never happened because Call of Duty Ghosts was so negatively received, we never actually saw a sequel, so we'll never really figure out what happened to those characters at the end of Ghosts, and that's a shame, and that definitely was poor writing on Infinity Ward's part. They should have just left it with them killing Rourke and the day being done, and instead they decided to somehow let Rourke survive that gunshot and capture the main character. Next up, we're looking back to Black Ops 4 again because they really messed up the overall microtransaction system in Black Ops 4, and the season pass has been handled so poorly it's a major disappointment. If you've spent any amount of time in Black Ops 4 and you've invested your $60 into the game, you're gonna immediately notice that the microtransactions for things like cosmetics is just garbage. It's really poorly done, and it's never in favor of the players themselves. And if you were a purchaser of the season pass, where you spend an extra $50 on top of buying the base game, you get disappointed even more because the season pass doesn't even benefit you as far as microtransactions are concerned, and you still are expected to put more money into the game, and the way that the DLC has been handled in Black Ops 4 is really disappointing. They just haven't been releasing good content, and they hype a service up that people put a lot of money into just to not have a good end product. It's really dumb that they're releasing multiplayer DLC maps that are just nighttime versions of the same maps and acting like that's new content when it's just the same map at night. It just really feels like Black Ops 4 was so lazily done, and so much of their resources obviously went into trying to make a battle royale game work in a Call of Duty engine, and the rest of the game has suffered because of that. But if Call of Duty and Activision can barely allocate funds to upkeep a game that is current and is less than a year old, the next issue that we're faced with is the fact that older Call of Duty games are very poorly supported by Activision and the developers. Sure, there's a few examples here and there where games continue to be supported. Sledgehammer Games has done a great job supporting Call of Duty World War II, and Treyarch continued to have new DLC releases even after Infinite Warfare released, because that's where all the Call of Duty players were and Activision needed to make money somehow. But for the most part, after a Call of Duty game ends its cycle and the next Call of Duty game comes out, it seems like Activision just shuts down any teams that are focused on supporting a game into the future. And I get it, they have to focus on the new game, but it's absolutely ridiculous that they still sell the older Call of Duty games on the Xbox store and on store shelves where players can buy these older Call of Duty games, and they're not cheap by any means either. The older Call of Duty games are still sold for a pretty high price, and they're not supported. They've released Call of Duty World at War, which came out in 2008, in a physical form at stores with Xbox One branding on it to show people that you can play it on the Xbox One, and the game is riddled with hackers even still. It just really irks us that they're willing to continue to profit on these older games but not allocate just a couple of people or just some anti-cheat systems to make the game work better. And don't even get us started with the way that they handle PC Call of Duty games after release. Black Ops 4 saw steps in the right direction, sure, but every other PC game of Call of Duty has been, it's had some issues. Next up, we have the more recent issues of Call of Duty games becoming pay to win. Yeah, if we thought the issues with Call of Duty would have stopped by now, we've seen a slow creep by Activision to introduce microtransactions into the game that can give some players advantages over other players who don't put the little bit of extra cash in first. This all really started to be a problem back in Call of Duty Ghosts when they introduced the Ripper. It was a submachine gun and assault rifle in one gun, and literally everyone used it, and people bought the DLC just to have access to that gun because of how overpowered it was, and it never got patched. You could even argue that the Peacekeeper before that in Black Ops 2 was problematic as well, but I just remember it really coming to the forefront with Ghosts. And then we saw it get worse than just being able to buy the gun outright. Then they started adding loot boxes and whatnot to get special variants of guns that were better than other guns. Advanced Warfare was awful with this, with the special ASM1 that everyone was trying to get so that they could have the best SMG in the game. And just the fact that they let this happen and let this break their game and they just didn't do anything about it is really disappointing. And then finally, the biggest issue that's really plagued Call of Duty and almost as a blanket statement for everything else on this list is Activision's inability to listen to the community. This has been a massive issue for a long time now, where essentially fans have given feedback about the game itself and Activision just chooses to ignore it unless it benefits them in some sort of PR standpoint. For example, when Call of Duty World War II went into beta, a ton of fans gave Sledgehammer Games feedback as to how they wanted domination to be handled, and they jumped to actually responding back and making changes in the beta that best benefited the game. And that was great to see, and it got fans excited thinking that finally there's some communication between the gamers and the developers. But then when the game released, they just went back on all the fixes that they had claimed to have listened to their community on. It was a bait and switch, and it was just one example of many of the things that Activision and the developers that are employed by Activision have had to do in the past. But we wanted to turn this around to you. What do you think the biggest offense that Activision has done that has hurt the Call of Duty community and definitely backfired on the brand as a whole? Let us know what you're thinking in the comment section down below. We're really curious to see what you guys have to say. For new videos just like this though, be sure you're subscribed with notifications on. You can also follow us on Twitter at Rocket Elijah and at Rocket Sloth Luke to continue this conversation. We're actually following back quite a few people who follow us, so if in the next couple days you give us a follow, we'll probably follow you guys back. But anyways, that's it for today, and we'll see you all next time with a brand new video.